Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Ball Fake Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and support our new movement by putting Let's Go Viral in the comment section. But if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. But without further ado, here are your hosts, Nicely Chunga Benny and Greg King.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Ball Fake Podcast, members of the Off the Ball Network. And in today's episode, as you guys can see by the title, we're going to be discussing, game one of the Eastern Conference Finals matchup between the Boston Celtics and the Miami Heat. But before we get started with today's episode, if you guys are new to our YouTube channel or you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast streaming platform, make sure to download all of our episodes, share it with your friends, and make sure to also give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. And if you're listening on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, turn on post notification, and furthermore, just continue to support the channel, as we would greatly appreciate that. But let's talk about game one's matchup, Boston versus Miami. Battle of the defenses, right? And we saw a lot of defense playing, specifically in the second half. We saw a lot of defense being played in different varieties of the game, right? Coming into this matchup, Boston, obviously, despite, them being a little bit shorthanded, I still feel like, this was a team that had a little bit of an edge on Miami, just given the individual, shot creation that they could rely on in a half-court setting if anything went wrong with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They also have a lot of guys similar to Miami who can knock down shots on the perimeter if you leave them open in those instances, and not to mention, them being able to combat Miami's defense with, a number one defense that, they pertain for the entirety of this year, right? And, with that being said, despite Marcus Smart not being in the lineup, despite Al Horford missing time due to safety and health protocols, Boston was able to come out and punch Miami in the mouth early on to start the game. Miami, defensively, we understand this is a team that is going to do a lot of switching action. And if you properly understand how to analyze and take advantage of teams that do a lot of switching, especially when you're a team like Boston that has the size advantage and, like I mentioned, the necessary individual creation in the half-court setting that can allow you to be able to, put the ball in the basket at an extremely high rate, you can take advantage of, the smaller Miami Heat defense in those instances, right? And I think in the first half, Boston was able to take advantage of, some of those things, right? Primarily, Jason Tatum just did a great job in terms of picking and choosing his spots. I think the Milwaukee series taught him a lot about himself and how he needs to approach the remainder of these postseason games here on out. He did a great job in terms of, implementing a lot of middle penetration diagonally into the half-court setting. He was able to find guys in a lot of instances out of the pick and roll, dropping off passes to, guys in a short roll, and that leading to, baskets around the dunker spot. And due to his gravity, he was able to draw multiple defenders for the entirety of the night, right? Him being able to find guys on the throwback option in the corner, in the wings. And if you're Boston, similar to that Celtics series, you're going to have to be able to knock down the outside shot if you want to better your chances of, moving on in this series, competing in an NBA Finals for the first time since 2010. And, with that being said, a lot of those things worked out for them well in the first half. And on the defensive side of the basketball, typically Boston, just like Miami, is one of those teams that is known for their defensive switchability, right? Having a lot of guys at the point of attack and interchangeable parts defensively. You have guys who can protect the rim. You have a lot of guys that you can, just insert perimeter-wise in those roles of a point of attack on the perimeter and live off the defensive prowess that they so obviously obtain. And with that being said, Boston, to start out the series, they did not rely on, heavy switching. It was a lot of drop coverage with Robert Williams. Understandably, knowing that Bam Adebayo is not going to be a guy that is going to hurt you on the offensive side of the basketball. And I think Miami fans need to understand that a little bit more. This is a guy that, if he's not scoring in drop-off opportunities, if he's not catching the ball in the dunker spot above the rim, or, you getting anything out of him in transition, rim running to the basket, he's going to be extremely limited as an offensive player, right? And, given that, Robert Williams, sat in deep drop coverage to start out the game. And more importantly, the reason why Boston decided to not switch everything to start out this series is because typically, a lot of coaches think that switchability can, put their guards in positions where they're going to be more susceptible to participating in bang-bang plays around the basket on defensive rebounds. You don't want Peyton Pritchard switched out on Bam Adebayo. And when it comes to, just trying to box out and, grab opportunities around the rim. And given since Boston is coming off of a series where, there was a lot of physicality, I think Ime Udoka just wanted to avoid putting his guys in those tougher situations and ensuring that his guys are going to be able to stay healthy over the course of this series, because like I mentioned, they're already missing out on Marcus Smart due to injury. Al Horford wasn't present because he was put in safety and health protocols. But, guys like Robert Williams, he's also somebody that, is dealing with, some lower body injuries as of right now. And, in that second half, he didn't really look like himself because, all of the physicality. And I think, just the game overall weighing on him because, the uptick in minutes that he had to provide, right? But, with that being said, one thing I want to talk about Boston with, from an offensive perspective, I want to talk about Jaylen Brown's role within this offense, right? Because we understand that this is a guy that's going to be put in a lot of one-on-one coverage. They're going to rely on him for a lot of isolation points. And typically, they like to, allow him to get himself going, particularly attacking one-on-one coverages and dribble handoff action. That being said, given Jaylen Brown is limited as a passer, a lot of teams decide to, kind of stagger up his side of the floor, especially in instances where you get those spot minutes where Jason Tatum isn't on the floor. Boston struggles a little bit putting the ball in the basket in those instances because Jaylen Brown, he forces himself a lot. He tends to try to beat the defense by himself in a lot of instances. And I think, given the opposing teams understand that, this isn't a guy who's going to hurt us with his passing, they tend to, just load up on him individually, and either they're going to live with him forcing the ball out of his hands, or, they're going to bait him into taking a heavily contested shot in isolation. And with that being said, that is the reason why, you see a lot of inconsistent shooting nights out of Jaylen Brown. A lot of it also has to do with the fact that, he could just be a lot better in terms of processing what the defense doing to him and things of that nature, right? Enough about Boston. Let's talk about Miami side of the spectrum, right? Because, like I mentioned, to start out the game, they weren't all that active. And one thing that we understand about, Miami's half-court offense is that, Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, particularly for the majority of this season, have not been that adequate playing on the floor at the same time, right? And, given since Jimmy Butler's been shooting the basketball a lot better, they no longer have to really worry about staggering both him and Bam Adebayo's minutes, because in instances when these two guys are on the floor at the same time, Miami's offensive rating drops drastically. And from a defensive perspective, Miami was able to find their ways back into this game, similar to Boston, like I've mentioned multiple times in the episode, doing a lot of switching. And the turning point for Miami obviously was in the third quarter. I think Jason Tatum, like I mentioned, the wear and tear of this series, this is a team that's coming off of a 7-game series against, the defending champions, despite, missing out on Chris Middleton. It was a very hard fought series. So I think in the second half, Boston, they definitely let their shoulders down a little bit and weren't as aggressive, but Miami did a great job in terms of getting out in the passing lanes. Jimmy Butler utilizing his strong base and limited athleticism and his defensive awareness, right? He's a defensive playmaker. He knows all the necessary tendencies and does all the necessary things in order to come up with extra possessions for his ball club, right? And you saw that on display in the third quarter. I thought, him and Max Strus made the adjustment of, pushing up on Tatum in pick and roll coverages defensively, making him get rid of the basketball either a second or two earlier. And in the first half, he wasn't seeing those types of coverages, right? They weren't really doubling all that much in the pick and roll because, he was hurting them a little bit with his passing, right? I want to give some credit to guys like Gabe Vincent. I thought he had a phenomenal game tonight. He's an underrated initiator within this offense, right? This is a guy that, does a great job of taking care of the basketball, not going to turn you over, doesn't really do anything flashy, gets to his necessary spots, and, can give you a lot on the other side of the basketball from a defensive perspective. We saw moments where he was matched up with Tatum, matched up with Jaylen Brown, and he was able to contain those guys from, getting any deep dribble penetration. You're not going to post him up. He's got a strong base for a guard. And, guys like Max Strus, they were finally able to come along in that third quarter, start knocking down shots on the perimeter. I also want to talk about, the role that Tyler Hero played in tonight's matchup. Him and Victor Oladipo, their ability to, create shots in the half-court setting and just being able to provide that little bit of mid-range, sprinkle in the ability to shoot the mid-range at a high level, really adds a nice little element to this Miami half-court offense, just given this isn't a team that has, a distinct shot profile when it comes to, shooting the mid-range shot. It's a lot of shots outside where they tend to get all the way to the basket, right? And when you're going up against a bigger team that, has the defensive prowess like Boston, you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to score at the rim. All in all, Gabe Vincent, he was just phenomenal for the entirety of the night, I would say. Obviously, we have to mention Jimmy Butler's production from an offensive perspective tonight. Gave you 40 plus points, off great efficiency. This is a guy that, just plays well within himself. He's had some luck in shooting the basketball this postseason. And, primarily, he's just a guy that has just been able to take advantage of, his distinct skill set. And that's not going to involve a lot of perimeter shot making. He's not a guy that plays with his head above the rim or anything of that nature. That's probably why the casual eye might not understand what he's able to really fully do from an offensive perspective on the basketball court. But with that being said, Jimmy Butler is one of those guys in the NBA that, typically likes to work around the short range area, right? And, he's been able to maximize his opportunities given Miami spacing, given the ability to, just score within isolation scenarios, and just being able to, understand how he can get to his spots necessarily, and, just being able to simplify the game in all aspects from those dynamics, right, in the half court setting. And I think, that also adds a nice little wrinkle to this Miami Heat offense, which, is a little bit lacking in terms of individual creation, right? I talked about, Tyler Herro's impact, Victor Oladipo from that perspective as well. And once again, just discussing this second unit for Miami, who I thought, did a great job in terms of, keeping things close for them in that first half. Tyler Herro being able to come in and, take advantage of, these Boston bigs sitting in drop coverage, right? Now, ultimately, Boston was doing a lot of chasing over the top for the majority of these guys, like Max Strus coming out of DHO action, pistol coverages in the half court. And you had guys like Derek White chasing over the top, playing his backside, forcing him into, these driving lanes that are going to be a little bit congested, right? But, despite some of those things, like I mentioned, the third quarter definitely was a story of the game. 39 points in that quarter for Miami, 14 for Boston. Jason Tatum, had a lot of turnovers in that quarter, I believe 3. And my issue with that wasn't the fact that he was turning the ball over, it was how he was doing it. It was just simply Miami coming up with a lot of on-ball strips. It wasn't like he was turning the basketball over, trying to make the correct play, trying to find guys like Peyton Pritchard on the opposite wings on throwback options. It wasn't anything of that nature. He was basically just getting the ball stripped away from him. And like I mentioned, given, they just came off a hard-fought series against, Milwaukee, a 7-game series, we understood that, especially coming out early on this matchup, them giving their all in that first half, they were going to be a little bit fatigued heading into this one because, this was a team that only played 7 guys. Miami went 9 deep tonight. Dedmon got some minutes. Gabe Vincent started. I mentioned Tyler Herro and Oladipo getting in within the action, right? We understand Max Strus is finally a starter. Caleb Martin gave you spot minutes as well. And, with that being said, I think that definitely played a role in, Miami being able to take over this match. They had a plus 25 point differential in the third quarter. That was a franchise record for them in the postseason. And, they've been the best team at home this postseason, not losing a single game. They're now 8-0 at home. Boston, it's going to be really tough for them to, come back in game 2 and come up with a win. Ironically, I didn't really see anything that stood out to me that, I was really concerned about for Boston's end. I think typically, once they get Marcus Smart back, they're going to be able to, have a lot of switchability on the defensive end. Miami's not going to be able to punish in those instances where Boston will be able to switch on the perimeter, given Marcus Smart's ability to, defend at a high level. They're missing out on the defensive player of the year participation. And then when it comes to Al Horford, he's going to allow them to play a 5-out offense where we understand it's going to be really beneficial to those Jason Tatum drives and the Jaylen Brown drives, given the spacing in the half court and the ability for those two to, just make the proper reads, primarily Jason Tatum in those instances, right? And then on the defensive end of the basketball, we understand he's also going to come up with a lot of rebounds. And offensively, on the offensive glass, Miami is just going to have a tough time keeping both Horford and Robert Williams off of the offensive glass from that perspective. And then you're not going to be as reluctant to, playing guys like Daniel Tice heavy minutes as well, like you had to do tonight. But all in all, I feel pretty comfortable about my prediction of having Boston in 6. I do believe that, primarily this is a team that more than likely will be ending up in the NBA Finals, and they have a real opportunity of being able to, bring a championship to Boston for the first time in over 10 years. But hey, you guys let me know what y'all think about this here in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode with me here on the Ball Fake Podcast. If you're new to our YouTube channel or you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other podcast streaming platform, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, turn on post notification, give us a nice review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and make sure to follow our socials on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Ball Fake Podcast. But besides that, it's your boy Nicey Chungabini. You're listening to the Ball Fake Podcast, and we out. Praise God.